So, I hope everyone enjoyed their coffee and whatever else they managed to find out there. We're going to carry on with this morning's proceedings and take a look at the sort of aspect of managed entry agreements and some of their development and application. And my colleague, Dr. Phil Spearpoint, who's co-leads our work in this area, is going to take us through that. Phil's got a long-standing background in consulting and has worked in a range of different areas. So without saying too much more, I'll hand over to Phil, who's going to take us through the next session. Thanks, Phil.
Thank you, Andrew. Everybody can hear me, I assume. It sounds like it's on, so I think we'll crack on. So, I'm going to talk a bit about a general perspective on managed entry agreements and sort of focus more from a company perspective on how you might want to think about doing and defining, implementing and operationalizing these managed entry agreements. I think that in the last few weeks we've had, things are appearing, we've had some interesting happenings in the world of pharmaceutical pricing. Some people doing some rather silly things, putting drug prices up by astronomical amounts, and that's not helped things, frankly. So with a lack of a coherent system for value-based pricing and with pharmaceutical pricing set to be very uncertain, things are going to change. MEAs, managed entry agreements, are a way of bridging a gap between what a payer would like to see and what a pharma company would like to derive from the value of their product. The work we do in this area as a company tends to be anything from what does my company want to do regarding managed entry agreements to portfolio, product-specific strategies to implementing submitting and implementing an agreement in a country. So there are various facets of the type of work around this, but that's the general broad area of the work and some of the points we cover today. So I'm going to talk about some of the challenges, some of the stakeholders. So a lot of these things at the national, less at the local level, are highly procedurized. But actually, if you address what the stakeholders want, and it's not one stakeholder, it's many stakeholders. Sorry, guys, it's complex, just to be very honest. You need to understand what they want. Now, you will not make all the people happy all the time, but MEAs are a mechanism by which you can try and make most of the people somewhat happy some of the time, which is probably the best you're going to get. I'm going to talk about some of the historical precedents of what's been done previously in countries, about some of the agreements. I'm going to talk about some of the new thinking, so some of the stuff that's come out of RAND, and I believe the gentleman who actually wrote the paper is here today. And then some top tips, basically. Okay? So, pharmaceutical pricing is changing. This is now a political issue in what has been potentially one of the few markets where prices will go up, have been going up. In EU, they certainly don't. Hillary Clinton has said, I'm sorry, that's probably a slightly unflattering picture of her, she's going to cap things. And that's in response to a number of things. You know, $90,000 for the cost of a hepatitis C cure, $1.1 million for a cost for cure for gene therapy, 5,000% drug price hikes. Now, these are big numbers. And these are somewhat alienating certain groups in healthcare systems. And the pharmaceutical industry has to take a responsible perspective to this regardless. Now, I'm not blaming the entire pharmaceutical industry for this, far from it. This was somebody being stupid. But the politics and the furore which has been caused has meant that how you're going to price your drugs in the future is now uncertain. There is going to be fundamental policy and procedure change in the next 5 to 10 years because of this, and it's coming. And you have to deal with that uncertainty. We have clients now coming to us saying, I'm really unsure how I'm going to price my product, let alone do an MEA. And this is important because the whole paradigm has shifted. And there's a reason for this. It's because there's finite budgets. You know, if you look at someone like the UK, there's more people, there are more people getting old, getting more illnesses, but there's no more money. They have to do more with either less or the same amount. And this is causing such a strain on the system that payers are only going to reimburse therapies which show value for money, which show clinical benefit, quality of life, which have a positive economic impact. If you don't have the value as promised, both in your clinical trial design, and sometimes that's not just enough, you have to show it in the real world now as well, everything's shifting. It's become, the hurdle is becoming higher. And in some ways that's very fair, in others it potentially isn't. So what does this mean? It means cost constraints, increasing sophistication in how payers are looking at these things. So, for instance, as I asked the question earlier, NICE are now investigating at an academic level how performance-based managed entry agreements could be used. Okay, it is part of, as Carl has pointed out, you can do complex managed entry agreements and absolutely accept that. But I think that it's more to be, there's more how do we use agreements to collect hard clinical outcomes. As we said, Velcade is probably the only one which uses a biological response marker based scheme. There are other schemes which are financial based, linked to clinical guidelines. But true managed entry schemes, unless you're in somewhere like Italy where they have the infrastructure to do this, very few are pure performance-based agreements. They are the exception rather than the rule. And the question is actually that sort of agreement, if you can do it right, is of true value to all stakeholders. But it's doing it right, and doing it so it can be done in the NHS without tipping the balance to a high administrative burden. And as Andrew said, companies can have to pay for things. There are ways to simplify these, and we'll discuss some of that later. Greater transparency on net pricing across geographies, capitated drug prices and scrutiny. When Alexion took Celeris to NICE, they said, okay, your cost per quality is good, fantastic, but you want to treat 270 patients for about 40 million. Excuse me if those numbers are incorrect, but they're in the ballpark. Can you please explain to me why I'm going to spend this amount of money on these amount of small patients? We see the clinical benefit, it's clear, but this is a huge budget impact. So Alexion had to come back and explain. They got it through, but there were limits. There was dosing, dose monitoring, and set treatment centres. They didn't get a free ride. Innovative pricing, contracting schemes, new investment models. So I'll speak about that a little bit later. That's probably more theoretical at the moment, but in Italy, there is a new one, which is a success fee model, which is a variation on the payment by results scheme, where actually payment's not made until you actually see the clinical benefit, so increasing risk. And then focus on gathering real-world evidence at the patient level. This is somewhat the bane and the panacea, sort of angel and the devil on the shoulders, if you like. Can we do this? Capturing data and increasing the risk share based upon that data. If you speak to certain payers, so for instance, I've been to talk by some of the payers in the Netherlands, and they have spoken when they've done coverage with evidence development, conditional reimbursement, they've spoken about paralysis via analysis. They collect so much data, and that's not the problem. You can get the data, as long as within reason, but it's how you analyse it and how you agree the metrics to which the performance and the contract is linked, and that has to be really simple. So the point is that these MEAs, and this is a bit of my prediction, and I certainly see it now with the risk-sharing monitors and the registries in Italy. So they've got a new system since 2013. Most high expensive drugs have some form of cap, managed entry agreements, so cost-sharing, risk share, payment by results, success fee. These are going to be integrated into your P&R process. They are already in some countries, but increasingly you will have this as part of your reimbursement package, if you like. So to get it, you'll have to do an MEA, you'll have to give a discount as per legislation in the country. You're going to have a list price and then lots of other bits added on top. And will you see it in all countries? Probably not, but in the vast majority you will, until we come to a coherent perspective. So that's what the future holds. The future is somewhat bleak, I would say. However, there is light, and that is by engaging people in the process so that you come to a mutual agreement, a mutual contract with evidence development or financially based that works for all parties. And the way we think about it, we think of it in sort of 3 segments. Very simple. I'm sorry, it's a bit consultancy, but we are consultants after all. Stakeholders, process, and value demonstration. These are the 3 things you have to care about when thinking about how to engage people for contracting purposes. Pharma is a highly regulated industry. It is highly complex. This is a very busy slide. This is probably only a modicum of the different payers, patients, healthcare system, competitors, practitioners, regulators, all the people you have to engage to get a drug to market and get it paid for. This is not a simple analysis. So when I hear people stand up here and go, who's my customer? Come on, guys. They're all your customers. You make the drug for the patient. The payer pays for it. The regulator says it's safe. You have to care about all these people. And with new ways to market, like adaptive pathways, all of these people matter more. Okay, it's no simple. Now, you have to understand that, for instance, in Europe, you have the EMA, a centralized system. You have national HTA bodies which assess drugs, which use different mechanisms. Some are therapeutic, benefit-based. Some are cost-effectiveness-based. Some are budget impact-based. A good contracting mechanism deals with the interdependencies between these stakeholders. Some you won't have to care about, but you have to think in terms of this level of complexity. You have to map the stakeholders, understand their needs and their wants, and what you have to give them to get through the hurdles. Okay? How do you do that? You talk to them. And to be fair, there are lots of opportunities to talk to regulators, payers. Not about MEAs directly, to be fair, but you can gain insight into your trial design, scientific advice. These are all points which, if you've provided a thoughtful clinical trial program and other aspects, that you can gain insight into how or what the type of maybe a performance-based MEA might look like. Okay, so to be fair to all the agencies, and there are a few in the room here, there's more than enough ways to talk to them. And at some point, when you come to the market, you will go through a process of creating an MEA. Sometimes that's set by the authorities, sometimes you propose it, sometimes it's a negotiation. And we'll talk a little bit later about co-creation. But you have to use these mechanisms to care for people. The question is, what do they care about? And that's the product value. It's all these things. It's the disease burden, it's the unmet need, it's the clinical efficacy / effectiveness of your product, the quality of life, humanistic benefits, and the economic benefits. Now, these can be positive, they can be negative, and depending on the balance and the makeup of these, it can differentiate your product, or it can be another me too. Okay. Now, for orphan drugs, it's slightly different. And I think we're still a little bit in the Wild West now. What we do know with orphan drugs is that the pricing paradigm we currently have is probably going to be challenging to keep as it is, okay? Because we're charging high prices, and increasingly there are more people on the market for these rare diseases, okay? But the point is, if you haven't got the data, if you've got a negative perspective on this angle, you've got to go into payer negotiations not looking good. And you have to contract in an appropriate way to bridge the gap. And it's doing these things. It's thinking about looking at all of these metrics, maybe over some sort of time period, maybe looking at responders, non-responders. This is a geographical representation of that. And defining the contractual arrangements linked to the evidence, okay, which then allows you to bridge that gap and maybe deal with the benefits of your product, the differentiation. Sometimes it's pure financial. Sometimes it's just a budget impact question. And, there's no point doing a performance-based agreement to solve that. It's not going to fix it. It's a financial mechanism. Budget cap, price volume, sometimes just a simple discount. They do work, these simple discounts, by the way, on occasion. Now, I've just shown you a slide on performance-based agreements. It's not just a simple contract play, though. It's not just let's do an MEA, because companies now who are thinking advanced aspects of this, and there are those out there. You know, if you do an analysis, Novartis always top the list of the guys who do the agreements on this area. Okay, just to name but one. There are others. Roche have been very innovative in the UK, as an example, in looking at this. But the old toolbox of your clinical trial, your economic model, and your sales force, off we go, gun-ho, doesn't work anymore. There are different factors, and the way they're using contracting has changed, and that is actually integrating into the market access pathways. So looking at a combinatorial approach of maybe national access with coverage and evidence development, maybe a national approval with a managed entry agreement, and then local agreements on top. So if you look at Cimzia in the UK, there's a national managed entry agreement, a complex patient access scheme, free stock, yep, 3 months. And then there are local arrangements made with the NHS Trust to improve the formulary access. Now, I'd imagine if you talk to UCB, they'd probably say we probably gave a little bit too much on that one. But needless to say, from a gaining access and gaining use in the desired indication, it was a clever dual mechanism of national and local contracting. And sometimes other companies are doing service-based approaches. So it's a combinatorial approach that links the uncertainties that you have on one side and the toolbox of options you have on here on the other. And I'll speak about how we go through those and how you try and create them a little bit later in the top tips section. And this is a graphical representation. So this is literally saying it's linking pathway and contracting. And this is the way you need to think about national, regional, local pathways. These are all the pairs. Sometimes you'll have to deal with all of them. Sometimes you'll only have to deal with some of them. And the contract, the type of a contract you can put in place, be it performance, financial, service-based, or a combination of those together. And this needs to be mapped out. So imagine you have your stakeholder map, your pathway map, and all the barriers and key influences and decision points therein, and the contract options. You overlay them, and then you start to see a solution being built. That is not an inconsiderable amount of work, but that's what we try and do with clients when thinking about this. And it is sometimes complexity. If it's across multiple geographies, that also adds another aspect. The point is it's sifting the information to try and get to the key perspective points. Okay. So the question is, I've been through the sort of the scene set almost. You know, we've got a political problem. We've talked about stakeholders and some of the processes and some of the value that you need to extract, and some of the company strategic thinking about how you address this. There is actually something to be learned of both the historic precedences and some of the academic thinking to align on top of that. Okay, so this is where we are now. So if you look now, there have been a number of all the things I've spoken about, so financial, service-based, performance-based, and service-based. They've all been offered in various combinations, and some of these are quite complex arrangements. There are lists of these. I'm not going to go into them in all in detail. I'm happy to explain which of these are which and what they mean later on for anybody who's interested. And I sort of said, well, what are the uncertainties we're trying to deal with? These are the inherent issues with the product: lack of clinical evidence, poor economic case, utilization or adherence issues, patient education. These are all things which managed entry agreements address. But the question is, what's in it for everybody? Why do this? Or certainly, what are the benefits for the pharma company? And there are some. You know, these are all the issues I've mentioned. So data gaps, data versus price, pure gaps, reference pricing issues, multiple indications. That's a very hot topic at the moment. And I don't think at the moment we have a solution to that as we stand. We have a lot of oncology products. If you look at IMS data, going through 80% of them will have multiple indications that are coming through the pipe now. It's crazy. The question is, how are you going in somewhere like the UK, where you have a simple discount which prices to the lowest cost per quality, you can deliver real value in one indication and minimal value in another, and yet you're set at that thing, so that value is lost. So, multi-indication pricing is an issue. And then there's time. MEA, if you implement MEA in Italy, it improves your time to market. Considering that is a current tactic of IFA to delay market access, put it in class HH, etc., using an MEA. So MEAs do bring benefits to both the company And to a payer, they also bring a certain set of benefits, which is certainty around budget impact. They know they're getting paid for performance sometimes, i.e. for a drug that works. And these are the issues which, as I discussed earlier, you have to add together to create a thing. These are the strategic drivers of why you do this. Okay? There are some key issues that you need to think about. So again, make sure your MEA is aligned with these. Make sure that the scheme is workable. So something I'm going to talk about later is, not too later, there's not long left, guys. It's got to be workable. So if it's high administrative burden or you can't work the agreement for whatever reason, it's game over. Metric definition I'll discuss later, but you have to have a metric which can be predefined, which is measurable, and you have uncertainty. I need not refer anybody to the UK multiple sclerosis scheme where they've had to do multiple revisions of the data to get an answer of some description. Co-creation. Now this varies. Co-creation is sometimes thought of as a panacea, sometimes it's not. You can't do it in every geography. Where you can talk to people. The payers are actually payers, clinicians, healthcare system stakeholders are open to understanding why you want to do this, and unless you involve them, they will help you design some things. They're very good at critiquing yours, may I add, and they'll probably pull it apart. But if you get people in a room and help create things from some basic concepts, that can be quite useful. If we look at data that's come from LSE, so this is the data part. If you look at data from LSE, most agreements are financially driven. They deal with budget impact or cost effectiveness. And this is EU data, may I add. If you look at an EU-US comparison, the US is becoming more EU-centric, if you like. But it's more about utilisation rather than pure cost pressures, where in EU it's a lot more to reduce budget impact, etc. And I know we have a partnership with Avila. Kathy Hughes is coming over. If she's not in the room, she probably isn't, but she is a real expert on MEAs in the US and what you can do and what you can't do, and she'll be able to give a different perspective on this. But the point is, they're used for different reasons, different types of agreement, different markets, different healthcare systems. But needless to say, they're used in both entities, but for different drivers. This is a historical perspective on what's been used where. So lots of different geographies have done lots of different types of schemes, both financial and paid for performance. Again, I'm not going to go into the detail here. As I say, these slides will be available in electronic format after the talk. But needless to say, what you see here, and somewhat here as well, and a bit here, is experimentation, trying to find out how to make these more complex paid for performance schemes work. But actually what you find is everybody really just wants a discount. And the question is, why are these not made to work? When in matter of fact, sometimes these paid for performance schemes really do equal true value to a patient and to a payer. That's my perspective. Sorry, this is a really busy slide, and this is actually some of Soren Works, who sat down the front here. There's been thinking about how you deal with the new paradigm of treating curative therapies, multiple indication, and very expensive oncology therapies, etc. And what the RAND Institute have or RAND Corporation have proposed are novel, innovative finance mechanisms. So car financing, bond structures, house purchase, mortgage structures, and credit milestone payments. And sorry, please correct me if this is not a true representation of the data. But the point is, these are all novel mechanisms by which payment is made over a period of years, sometimes increasing, sometimes decreasing, with balloon payments without. But these are ways to spread budget impacts for drugs like Harvoni or Sovaldi, where, you know, if you treated everybody at once, it'd bankrupt a healthcare system. So this is some of the thinking. And sorry, correct me if I'm wrong, I don't think any of this has actually been implemented yet. So it's mainly theoretical at the moment. But the interesting thing is, how do we do this? And I'm sorry, again, it's very busy. It takes some time to digest. These will be available afterwards. Those are pure finance. But what if you link them to evidence development and payment? So I've got a gene therapy. I inject somebody. and I see an improvement and they keep coming back and I pay on the basis of this. So I'm not going to give you £1.1 million euros up front. I'm going to pay you 200,000 euros in year 1. In year 3, I'll pay you another 200,000 euros, and in year 5, I'll pay you the rest. So, and it's linked to a clinical criteria. And because this is where the benefits realise, when the patient's not coming in for plasmapheresis or some other expensive hospital therapy, they're not being hospitalised. And it's that delay. It's that, it's realising the benefits, but aligning the payment and the budget cycles over multiple years. Again, this is a slide which we used basically to help define our thinking when approaching this, which is understand your issues, define your strategy, design the solution, and then implement and monitor it. And that's really important. It's a very defined structure. I won't go into the detail on the slide, but the point is that's how you build the MEA structure of what you need to do, be it financial, be it performance-based, and then you link it to the contract terms. So those terms are, I will give you rebate of X based on response Y. Okay? And this is a slide which basically just illustrates some of the more innovative solutions where you combine not just a pure response scheme, but you link it to services or advisory services. So in this case, there have been examples where revenue has been derived from additional advisory service given by a company on top of the therapy. Okay, and there are examples of that. And again, 2 case studies. I'm just flipping through these because these will be made available. But I want to get on to the top tips. How much time do we have left, Andrew? Okay, right, well, I won't rush through then. 2 novel case studies. And this is quite interesting because flexibility in the scheme is something that is sometimes underrated. So conditionality, if you like. What do I mean by this? I mean, so if you take the Votrient patient access scheme in the UK, it was a 2-part scheme. There was an initial 12.5% discount given, followed by another rebate, I think another 12.5%, linked to its performance against other renal cell carcinoma drugs. And the outcome was that it had shown non-inferiority to those drugs. It reached that endpoint. Part B was never activated. So in theory, it's a 12.5% discount. It's a simple, transparent discount. The point of this scheme was it gave extra to the NHS if you didn't hit your targets. It had conditionality. It gave that flexibility and just gave that bit more. It basically, the company stood up and said, I think my drug's really good, and I'm actually gonna show you that it is and put my money on the table. You can't argue with that, can you? The NHS get more, and everybody wins really. Well, certainly GSK won that one. This is a novel model, a reinsurance model, where Roche provided the provided oncology products to the Chinese market, and they sort of worked with Swiss Re, who developed an insurance policy mechanism to ensure the cost of the drugs. Okay, so it was always reinsurance of the insurance policy, and that's due to the high cost of out-of-pocket drugs within China. So Roche provided its product portfolio and marketed the drugs. Swiss Re basically helped design all the insurance products, but basically it protected everyone so that make sure that all the cost of the drugs were covered. It's a very novel model. I can give a link to a blog which gives more detail about this, but it is interesting nonetheless, and one of the more novel financial instruments. I've also heard of people taking insurance policies out on the stock markets and all sorts of other wonderfully complex financial models, but that's probably in a bit of a different realm for today's discussion. Okay. I'm going to go through my top tips for running an agreement, okay? And I promise you this is the last section. Tip 1, use a structured approach. Select your concept, select your concepts, or establish the needs, select the concepts and evaluate. Build out the concept to a level of detail where you know how it would work, okay? Test it with the stakeholders. At the very minimum, develop a concept and don't just submit it to the authority if you have that luxury. You have to get a stakeholder agreement, test it, or ideally co-create it with them, which I'll talk about later. Oh, sorry. And then you have to run it through the negotiation, propose it, etc., and implement it, which I'll come to later. But this structured process, and normally during this bit, you might want to do both qualitative and quantitative assessment, which I'll come to later. Okay? Use a structured framework. So this is, I'm sorry, this is a very full and complete full slide, but this lists a universe of options that you can consider when thinking about what do I want to do with my contracting options. And you consider a universe and you narrow it down. It's very much a filter process and quite logical. And you have to understand what it addresses. Okay? So use a structured framework of the universe of options to narrow down into what's acceptable to you. Now, you narrow that down by using acceptable criteria. This is quite complex. Okay? This is probably too complex. I have these are criteria which have been used at some point for selecting MEAs, and it was a complete nightmare. Keep it simple. The three basic things that you need to work out are: does it work for the pharma company? Does it work for the payer? And is it implementable in the healthcare system? Is it too complex? If you can do those three things, and just maybe be clear, for those last two, you actually need to ask the relevant stakeholders, not just your opinion, then you probably have a good idea of whether a solution would work. Okay? You can go to this nth level of detail. I have done it. It is painful. It did get accepted, but needless to say. And then what you have to do, you have to differentiate the different components. So these are all separate entities. So a price volume agreement, maybe linked to a responder-based scheme. You can mix and match them. Whatever you do, evaluate them in isolation and then together. Normally, we recommend a toolbox. So you have 4 or 5 different components that you can use in isolation or stick together. So it's really important that you have that flexibility in your contracting approach. And what's quite good is that normally you probably need to work from global to local on it, so that global are aware of what's going on. Sometimes they do the work. But basically, everybody's happy with the options, and they've signed them off. Performance markers. So if you're going to do a performance-based criteria, so from anything from a short-term surrogate marker to a long-term outcome, it has to be measurable and it has to be within a defined time period. And you have to understand the delta or the incremental benefit you're going to show on that particular marker. So that's your performance link. And then you have to understand what exactly, should you meet marker, what happens? If you don't meet that marker, what are the terms? So what's the rebate? What's the percentage discount? And it has to be written down, no absolute clarity. Otherwise, you end up with MS scheme to the revenge. Now, see, this is quite interesting. So model your schemes. So understand the revenue impact and also the budget impact implications. So this is almost a more external-facing aspect and this is a more internal-facing perspective on your pharma companies. It's interesting. Some companies do this really well and do it in quite an advanced fashion. Others don't do it at all. Yeah. So we see all and sundries with this. It's important. This is an example of blank data, which illustrates a case we did a year and a half ago. But needless to say, it just shows you understand what are you giving up to get access. If you're still giving after all you've done, but you're giving 50% of your revenue away, is it still worth doing the agreement? If you actually look at the case and analyse the data, is it having if the point of the agreement is to affect budget impact, is that really a benefit? You don't know. Tip 6, co-create. There are examples. It has been done. This is not, I have designs, let's go test them with a group of pairs in a room. It is sit pairs in a room, agree the uncertainties, agree the potential options, and make it work. So what data source do I use? How do I implement the scheme and train the relevant healthcare system up to run the scheme in the pharmacist? How do I decommission the scheme? These are all things you have to think about when doing this. These are the questions you get asked. Okay. Tip 7, operationalize the scheme. Now, defining the strategy, modelling the scheme, and getting sign-off from a payer body or an HTA agency saying, yeah, that's what we're happy with. That's one point. Implementing it is a whole different ballgame. And these are all some of the things you need to think about depending on the scheme. If it's financial, you'll have less data implications. But you need to think about legal agreements, what data can you use, what can't you use, how do you get access to it, can you have access to it, communication, training people, etc. IT infrastructure, where do you get the data from? Okay, a key point to success in the UK is is making the scheme work so that the administrative burden is minimal to the pharmacist who's collecting the data or of some description in the hospital or using the right system. And it's a really delicate balance to do that correctly. And distribution and logistics. So, do you make your scheme a named patient scheme, and so that it's linked to the ordering through your wholesale reseller? Do you link it to pharmacy data? These there are certain linkages which you would require because that creates. Because, for instance, if you give a free stock scheme as an example, that normally means the pharmacist has to create two files, one in the pharmacy system, one for the free stock and one for the paid-for stock. It creates havoc, and they don't want to do it. These are small things, and you have to understand the intricacies of how the stakeholder who is going to be running the scheme wants to work it. Because, again, they're the people who will sit in a room and say, no, thank you, I don't want to do it. Last but not least, how do you, as an internal company, get ready for running one of these things? You have to have an implementation plan. You have to know who's doing what, when, where, why. Is it global or a local job? There's all things to think about, and this is a illustration of one plan. From valuation metrics to the IT support to legal guidance to the launch readiness checklist. These are all things people want to think about. And these are all relevant for MEAs. So, I'm at the end now. I hope I haven't bored you too much. If I had to say key things to take away, multiple stakeholders, please address their concerns. Prepare early, because the more time you have, the more thought through. I cannot tell you the amount of clients who come to us saying, oh my gosh, I've got my NICE review in 6 months and I need a patient access scheme. Well, I'm sorry, NICE need 3 months to look at it normally, so it's game over. Engage people. If you don't talk with people, what do you expect when you come through a solution which is ill thought out? If you had talked to them in the first place, they would have told you the problems. If not, they'll help you create it in some geographies, not all the time. If you thought thinking the MEA up was difficult, wait till you implement it. That is the most non-fun part, because you have to think through the minutiae of the detail, from an internal to an external perspective. So let me give you an example. I have a drug. It normally is given in hospitals, but it might be in a home care setting. What about private patients in an NHS hospital? How does that one work? The home care company is not allowed to be involved in the financial flows of the reimbursement process. Can't do that through them. These are how do you get around these things? And these are all the things you have to think about. So don't underestimate the complexity of implementation. Prepare early and be prepared to, when you are assessed by the relevant authority, to be asked some pretty detailed questions about this. Okay? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Phil. Are there any questions on that?
Thank you, Phil. Very interesting. Question I have for you is, if you consider the various, Kevin Cass from B. Bayless, by the way, but if you consider the various mechanisms to implement an access program, and you're comparing one over another, is there any financial implication for the manufacturer? For example, in the States, it might be better to give away first, second, third dose than provide a big discount. Just wondering if there's any tax implications or whatever.
Tax implications, you'd need to talk to a tax lawyer. I'm not aware of anything. There are certain structures which are preferred. Generally speaking, and I'm sure there are people in the room who could comment, the shorter the period of free initiation or dose cap, the better, because the longer you have to monitor it, the more data collection that's involved, the higher the administrative burden. So there is just a simple, level of effort aspect to it. I think also it's a combinatorial. You can end up giving a lot back in terms of both revenue and maybe a lack of advantage in budget impact for the company. And it may not move. If your ISA's 300k, no patient access scheme, for instance, in the UK is going to move that. If you're 60-ish, 50, 60-ish, then you might want to think about a simple discount or some form of complex scheme. But it's the reasons why you do it. So there are financial drivers that you have to think about. There are aspects of the design of any financial scheme or quasi-financial scheme that you should think about for more administrative. The only other point I'd raise is the financial flows. You must understand the financial flows of the relevant healthcare system. So who pays who, what, where, why, when implementing these things, because if you don't get that right, you will be pulled apart in any assessment of that scheme. You must understand it. You have to, and you have to keep it simple. You don't want multiple stakeholders. Okay.
China, just because reinsurance can be expensive as well, and so I'm curious who is actually funding. Were there different parties funding the reinsurance, or was it the individual insurers who were funding that reinsurance? Sure. I was wondering if you could elaborate on how that scheme actually worked.
Oh, I'm digging into my mind now. So I don't have the details here to my hand. I do know it was quite a novel scheme. I do have it on my laptop. I will dig it up and I'll send you the details of that. But it was quite novel because it was protection both for the policy holder, i.e. the individual had the insurance policy, but also for the manufacturer so that the drug would be reimbursed. So I do know that was the outcome of it. The exact mechanism of it I need to look up. So my apologies. I will talk to you about that later if that's okay. I'll catch you afterwards.
Henry Muñoz from Alcon. One question regarding your concept of cooperation. It's not a concept. I think I fully agree with your idea that we need to create together. But based on your experience, how you feel with that? How is the reality of how ready the players are prepared to do that? I see, for example, from industry, we are speaking about a lot of things, but at the end we are focused on our issues. I understand why. But it's, for example, in one of your slides you put issues and outcomes, etc. This was pharmaceutical issues.
Yeah.
And on the other side, how is that you have the players and how this managing the agreements is an excuse only to reduce the price, and that's all. How is the feeling that you have when you have in this as a consultant, what do you see?
Sure. So, as you've correctly identified, payers have one set of objectives, or payers / the healthcare system have one set of objectives, and pharma tends to have another. And it also depends who in the pharma company and who in the healthcare system / payers. Different payers want different things, right? If you're a regional or local guy, you probably care about different things. So it's about understanding the drivers. A managed entry agreement will give some benefits to a pharma company. So, for instance, if it's a performance-based scheme, it will probably protect list price from international price referencing. Okay, so the advantage of the healthcare system, it's only paying for the value of the drug. The point is, there has to be enough in it for the payer and enough in it for the pharma company to make it work. As regards to co-creation, you can do it. It depends on the country and the healthcare system. What you cannot use co-creation for is to circumvent the process for assessing agreements or to get in through the back door, if you like. That won't work. But there are scenarios, for instance, if, let's say, your drug hasn't got a NICE evaluation, you can go and talk to NHS England. You can get people in a room and go and get the experts and say, okay, what do you think the value of the drug is? How can we make this available? How can we make it cost neutral to the NHS, as an example, right? So, if your drug's going through PASLU will meet you and they'll discuss it with you. DOH will give you questions back, but then it's less co-creation. It's more of a set process, and you can't circumvent that. There's no way around that. But it doesn't mean that you can't get a bunch of local payers in a room as an advisory board or a workshop and get them to create a solution. If they're the guys who are if you've got the pharmacist from the Christie Hospital, big cancer hospital in the UK, and they're giving you advice on how a scheme might work in their hospital, then if it's good enough for them, it probably, unless you've missed something, it's going to be good enough for PASLU and the DOH, as an example. Same for Italy. IFA, for instance, is a to and fro process. IFA will tell you, I want to do a risk share or a payment by results, you'll go back and say, okay, we want to measure this marker at this month. IFE will go, no, we don't want to measure that marker at this point. We want to measure this marker at this point, so on and so forth. So it's a to and fro. It's a bit more spaced out.
Thanks, Philip. Laura Pope with Roche.
Hi, Laura.
You said you recommended going through this analysis as early in the life cycle as possible and pre-launch. But ideally, when would you build this into a launch roadmap?
Can vary by indication. So it depends. So take an example of Ilaris. Sorry to quote one of your fellow Swiss companies. They had a really early proof of concept in phase 1. Okay, on Muckles-Wells syndrome. So that got them approval. They could have looked at managed entry if they had required it. And they didn't need it because this is going back a while. But they could have done it off the back of that data because it was so strong. It was so clear, the clinical benefit. It's around proof of concept, really. You have to know that the drug works. Otherwise, payers probably aren't going to get in a room with you. You have to have some form of internal thinking about, well, what's the sort of price band I can look for in this drug? If it's orphan, then obviously things are a bit more ill-defined. So I would say probably I've seen people do it phase 1, phase 2. That's probably a little early. More around upon completion of phase 2A, whether you know the drug is working. Maybe if you were clever, you probably tried a quality of life indicator or maybe other surrogate measures as well. So you've got some clinical basis of thinking about it. If you can get an early interim phase 3 readout, fantastic. But that's probably the optimal timing. You can't work in a vacuous space unless you've got schizophrenia, you've got 6 atypical antipsychotics on the market, and you're the 7th. Then I don't think any EMA is going to help you. But the point is, unless there's a whole corral of data available for you to base it on and an infrastructure to collect the data. But yeah, that's my thinking around probably proof of concept. If I had to put a peg in the ground, don't disagree with me, Andrew, please.
No, I was just going to add to that, which is sort of combine the previous question with your question, which is that I think there needs to be a hypothesis of unevidenced value, and that needs to be some honesty around that from the pharma company, and there needs to be a willingness to engage from the payer's side to reach a compromise on that unevidenced value, which I think we heard from the Belgian example this morning. What doesn't work is one side trying to con the other, because that just creates bad feeling, and then you're back at square one. So I think start thinking about it reasonably early if you think you're going to be in that situation, and plan ahead. But as Phil said, plan your engagement well, and so it's not something to be applied kind of in every circumstance, because it may not be applicable. I think there's a degree of kind of it's not a sticking plaster. I guess is the analogy. Although unfortunately it's been used as such for quite some time.
So Gavin Jones from Quintiles.
Hey, Gavin.
On an engagement plan, there's been a lot of talk about stakeholders and payers. We've got regulatory, we've got HTA, we've got regional, we've got local.
Yep.
Can you give us a view on your opinion on an engagement plan that will ensure national acceptance but local adoption?
Now, if I remember rightly, you spoke on this last year, didn't you? Engagement in NHS in UK.
Me personally.
Okay. I know somebody from Quintiles did. So it really depends. Obviously, if you get a nice approval, you're funded. It doesn't mean you won't be fourth on formulary, though. Just to be clear on that, it does mean you fund. But so it varies by the drug. So let's take an orphan product. There are about 8 different pathways, including national and local pathways, to access in the UK for an orphan product. That's including NICE, CRG, CDF, commissioning through evaluation, and also varies. There are 8 pathways potentially you could use. Each of those involve some form of national review, potentially, and some form of regional review. I think based upon the prerequisites for a company. They want breadth of access as quickly as possible for the highest price. From a company perspective, you want to go national, because if you don't do that, if you're going to have to go to every CCG to get sign-off and you haven't got guaranteed funding, well, it's a problem. So that's from the company perspective. I also think from an NHS perspective, they want to have an agreed policy throughout the NHS England. Obviously, Wales and Scotland are separate entities, but they want a commissioning policy in place for something like this, or something sort of nice. So I think you have to go nationally initially. But I also think you have to take in stakeholders who might either have a dual perspective, so they might be a pharmacist and a local trust, and they can give both perspectives. So as regards engagement, from an access perspective, it's always national to local, from my perspective. Regulators obviously come first. So does that answer your question? Probably not.
I think it's a challenge.
I agree. I think you have to map. You have to understand where the key decision points are, and who does what and where and why, and that's difficult. And that it is unique in every scenario, because based upon your clinical evidence package and the potential pricing / budget impact of a drug, that can move the barriers you face. And so I think one map for one, the map looks similar in some respects, but actually when you go into the detail of it, there are different people are going to put different barriers to access up in that respect. So maybe that answers your question. I hope it does.
I think local consultation is key.
Yes, absolutely.
You've got to have that reality check in terms of your scheme's acceptance at a local level, but you do need national to provide that overall endorsement of your scheme.
To be clear, you could not do a patient access scheme. You could say, I'm not going to go to NICE and just go to the local formularies with a fantastic deal. The problem is it's the effort required to do that and the incremental benefit, because some trusts will say, yeah, fine, we'll fund it out of some magic budget we've got from somewhere, but a lot of them won't. And then we're back to a postcode lottery scenario, really, where some are funded, some aren't.
I'm conscious of time.
Okay.
And,